The ancient woods, a sprawling, gnarled tapestry of oak and pine, had been Valkyrie's sanctuary and prison for longer than most civilizations had drawn breath. His manor, a skeletal silhouette against the perpetually bruised twilight of the deepest forest, sagged under the weight of centuries. Dust, thick and soft as forgotten memories, coated every surface of its vast, chill interior. The air within always carried the same earthy scent of damp stone and decaying velvet, a subtle perfume of slow-motion ruin. Valkyrie himself moved through it like a ghost-given substance, his movements fluid, silent, his skin like polished marble, cool to the touch. For centuries, the only sounds that broke the oppressive quiet were the rustle of his own clothes, the distant hoot of an owl, or the almost imperceptible scrape of his polished boots on flagstones. That had known no other tread. He had come to love the silence, to crave its cold, predictable embrace. His existence was a perpetual twilight, a quiet hum of hunger beneath the surface of his composure. He remembered the taste of fear, the sharp tang of adrenaline in the blood, but he hadn't indulged in a human for over 100 years. The thought often felt like a physical ache behind his ribs, a deep, hollow yearning that no amount of animal blood could truly sate. He watched the seasons cycle, the vibrant green of spring fading to the fiery ochre of autumn, the biting white of winter. They were merely backdrops to his endless vigil. Another year, another decade, another century. What was the point? Then came Lunaria. She was an anomaly, a bright spark of vibrant life wandering into the very heart of his muted world. He'd first sensed her presence not by sight or sound, but by the subtle disruption of the forest's harmony, a snap of a twig too deliberate for a deer, a faint, sweet scent carried on the wind that wasn't pine or damp earth. She was a cartographer, she'd told him later, her hands smudged with ink and charcoal, her hair the color of warm honey, often tangled with stray leaves. She had stumbled upon his overgrown, seldom used path, drawn by the allure of an ancient, unnamed ruin on her maps. He had meant to scare her off. He'd materialized from the deepening shadows of the manor's ruined archway, a silent, imposing figure. He expected the scream, the panicked flight. Instead, she had merely paused, her head tilted, her eyes, the color of moss after a spring rain, observing him with an unnerving calm. "Hello?" she'd asked, her voice a soft melody against the creak of an old door pushed by the wind. No fear. Only curiosity. That was the first prick in the armor of his solitude, a tiny, unexpected warmth against the ice of his being. Lunaria, astonishingly, returned. Not every day, but often enough that Valkyrie began to anticipate the faint rustle of her approach, the distinctive scent of her skin, a mixture of wildflowers and sun-warmed earth. She brought with her not fear, but life. She spoke of the village beyond the woods, of the changing world, of old books and star charts. She never pressed him for answers about his nature, simply accepted him as he was, a silent, cold presence in the shadows. He found himself listening, truly listening, for the first time in centuries. He found himself allowing her to trace the rough, cold stone of the manor walls, to point out constellations in the velvet sky from his cracked observatory roof. He watched her, fascinated by the ephemeral nature of her being. Her breath plumed in the cold night air, a fragile cloud that dissipated instantly. Her skin, when he accidentally brushed it, felt impossibly warm, vibrant with a life he no longer possessed. How could something so fragile be so resilient, so unafraid? The questions echoed in the vast emptiness where his heart should have been. Her presence was a foreign weight, yet one he found himself unwilling to shed. The hunger was still there, a constant, low thrum, but it was dulled by another, more profound sensation, the fear of her leaving. One evening, while explaining an ancient constellation chart, Lunaria pricked her finger on a splintered piece of wood. A tiny bead of blood welled, dark and rich against the pale skin of her finger. Valkyrie froze. His senses sharpened, every nerve ending screaming. The metallic tang of it filled the air, thick and intoxicating. A low growl rumbled in his chest, a sound he hadn't made in generations. His fangs elongated, a sharp, aching pressure behind his lips. His nails dug into the stone windowsill, scraping a faint grit of dust from its surface. He felt himself teetering on the precipice of his ancient, monstrous nature. Lunaria looked at him, not with terror, but with a flicker of understanding. She saw the struggle etched on his face, the desperation in his wide, pupils-dilated eyes. Slowly, deliberately, she extended her hand, the single drop of blood glistening like a dark jewel. "Valkyrie," she whispered, her voice soft but unwavering. "I trust you." Quote. It was a dare, an offering, an act of faith that shattered centuries of his carefully constructed solitude. The urge to take, to consume, was overwhelming, but her gaze, so clear and accepting, was a stronger force. He trembled, a deep, shuddering tremor that shook his entire frame. He closed his eyes, drawing in a long, shuddering breath, filling his lungs with the scent of her, mingled with the faint tang of blood and the damp, ancient smell of the manor. He pulled his hand back, gripping his own forearm, his nails biting into his unfeeling flesh until he heard the faint tear of fabric. He opened his eyes, the hunger still a wild beast, but caged. "Don't," he rasped, his voice raw, hoarse from disuse and strain. "Please, don't." In that moment, something deeper than companionship solidified between them. It was a bond woven from trust, sacrifice, and the raw, terrifying honesty of his monstrous heart. The fragile peace of the shared twilight was shattered by the acrid scent of burning timber and the sharp, frightened cries of dogs. Valkyrie had known the risk. Lunaria's frequent visits had drawn unwanted attention. A mob of villagers, torches blazing like angry stars in the deepening gloom, had tracked her. They were armed with crude spears, rusted blades, and a terror born of superstition. Witch. Demon. The guttural shouts echoed through the quiet forest, the crackle of their torches and the snarls of their hounds ripping through the accustomed silence of his woods. Lunaria, caught outside, closer to the edge of the woods, screamed. It wasn't a scream of terror at him, but of pure, primal fear at the encroaching mob. Valkyrie heard it, a sound that ripped through him, through the centuries of detached existence. He moved. Not with his usual silent grace, but with a primal, terrifying speed that blurred his form into a streak of shadow. He reached Lunaria just as a heavy-set man, his face contorted in a mask of fear and rage, raised a pitchfork. Valkyrie interposed himself, the tine of the pitchfork scraping uselessly against his hardened skin. He twisted, his strength born of predator instinct and centuries of dark power, snapping the wooden handle with a sharp crack. The man stumbled back, his eyes wide with a horror that was both familiar and satisfyingly pure. The mob surged, a tide of desperate humanity. Valkyrie was a whirlwind of motion, a force of nature unleashed. He didn't kill them, not truly, but he maimed, he terrorized. He moved with impossible speed, a blur of dark fabric and pale skin. The thud of bodies hitting the damp earth, the sharp intake of breath from those who saw his unnaturally bright eyes, the metallic scent of fresh blood, not his, not hers, filled the air. He ripped weapons from hands, threw men against trees, the gasps of pain echoing through the woods. He snarled, a sound that was pure beast, a chilling symphony of predator and protector. Lunaria watched, her breath catching in her throat, her hands clutched to her mouth. She saw the monster in its terrible glory, the flashing fangs, the inhuman strength, the cold fury that glittered in his eyes. He was a creature of myth, a nightmare given flesh. But he was her nightmare, and he was fighting for her. He moved towards her, stepping over the crumpled forms of the villagers, his gaze piercing, possessive. "Run, Lunaria," he hissed, his voice rough, thick with the scent of their fear. He knew he could only hold them off for so long. She saw the faint glint of desperation in his eyes, the unspoken fear for her safety. She didn't run. Instead, she stood her ground, her face pale, but her eyes locked on his, a silent promise, an act of unwavering trust in the face of absolute terror. The forest slowly fell silent again, save for the distant moans of the injured and the faint whimper of a dog. The mob had retreated, broken and scattered, leaving a trail of dropped weapons and discarded courage. Valkyrie stood amidst the destruction, his body still humming with the aftershocks of unleashed power, a thin sheen of exertion on his brow. The acrid smell of wood smoke from a half-ignited tree mingled with the coppery scent of blood and the damp earth. He turned to Lunaria, expecting to see the ultimate fear, the final rejection. He was ready for it, for the inevitable consequence of showing her the true depths of his dark nature. She was trembling, her hands still pressed against her lips, her eyes wide. But there was no outright terror. There was shock, certainly, and a deep, visceral understanding of the chasm that separated their beings. Slowly, she lowered her hands. Her gaze swept over the fallen villages, the shattered trees, the undeniable evidence of his power. Then her eyes settled back on him, unwavering. A soft whimper escaped her lips, not of fear, but of profound sadness. She walked towards him, her steps hesitant but determined. Valkyrie braced himself, his body tense, expecting a blow, a cry, anything but this quiet approach. She reached him, her fingers, still faintly smudged with charcoal, reaching out. She touched his cheek, her palm cool, but with an underlying warmth that radiated through his cold skin. "Valkyrie," she whispered, her voice choked, you saved me." Quote. He could feel the erratic beat of her pulse beneath her skin, the fragile flutter of her life force against his ancient coldness. He saw the flicker of awe, yes, but also a deep, almost painful understanding. She had witnessed his monstrosity, his unbridled violence, and instead of fleeing, she had sought him out. The silence between them was heavy, broken only by the faint dripping of dew from the leaves and the hollow thud of her own heart. He leaned into her touch, a small, involuntary gesture, the gesture of a man starved for solace. His earlier hunger had vanished, replaced by a profound weariness, a deep ache for this impossible connection. He realized, with a jarring clarity, that the true monster was not the beast within him, but the centuries of loneliness that had festered in his soul. The immediate aftermath was quiet, reflective. Lunaria stayed, not as a captive, but as an anchor. Together, they tended to the damaged manor, salvaging what they could. The scent of damp wood and ancient stone was now mingled with the faint, earthy smell of the herbs Lunaria gathered to make her soothing tea, the sweet, familiar smell of her presence. The woods had always been a sanctuary for Valkyrie, but now, with Lunaria, it felt like a home, truly. Her acceptance was a balm, a constant, gentle pressure against the raw edges of his being. She saw not the monster, but the protector, the ancient soul burdened by immortality and isolation. She understood the darkness within him, acknowledged it, and still chose to stay. Valkyrie, in turn, learned to exist with a new kind of vulnerability. He still hunted, still consumed the blood of animals, the sharp tang of it keeping the deepest, human hunger at bay. But he was no longer alone in his struggle. Their bond transcended the physical. It was a profound intertwining of two disparate souls. He found comfort in the gentle weight of her hand in his, in the soft cadence of her breathing as she slept beside him, a warmth radiating into his perpetual chill. She found strength in his silent protection, in the fierce, unyielding loyalty of a being who had seen empires rise and fall. They walked the moonlit paths of his ancient woods, her footsteps light beside his silent tread. The crisp night air would carry the whisper of her stories and the low rumble of his infrequent, but heartfelt, responses. Lunaria taught him how to see the world again, not as a backdrop to his unending existence, but as a place of beauty and fleeting wonder. She pointed out the delicate blush of dawn on a distant mountain peak, the velvety texture of moss on an old tree, the sweet, earthy scent of rain on parched ground. He, in turn, showed her the hidden depths of his world, the secrets of ancient trees, the silent wisdom of the night, the strange, stark beauty of timelessness. Their love was a dark, enduring flame in the heart of the ancient forest. It was unconventional, born of shadow and light, a testament to the power of connection that could bridge the chasm between mortal and immortal, human and monster. The future was an unknown expanse, her life was a flicker, his an eternity. But in the quiet moments, in the shared silences and the gentle touches, they forged a bond that defied logic, a love that was, to them, everything. The distant hoot of an owl was no longer a symbol of solitude, but a shared note in the symphony of their intertwined lives, a melody woven into the very fabric of the old, dark woods. Chapter 5. The Cartography of a Heart. The distant hoot of an owl, a shared note in the symphony of their intertwined lives, wove its melody into the very fabric of the old, dark woods. Days bled into weeks, weeks into months, a tapestry of shared silences and hushed conversations unfurling within the ancient manor. Lunaria, no longer a transient guest but an anchor, brought a vibrant, earthy hum to the centuries of stillness. Valkyrie found himself drawn to the new rhythms of her life. The soft scratch-scrape of her quill against parchment, a sound he hadn't heard in living memory, became a comforting counterpoint to the rustle of leaves outside his window. He watched her as she worked at the sprawling oak table in the drawing room, now her impromptu study, cluttered with rolled maps, half-finished sketches, and an array of inks that smelled faintly of gall and earth. The afternoon light, dappled and bruised amethyst through the grime of the leaded panes, would illuminate the fine dust motes dancing around her head, catching the auburn strands of her hair like embers. She makes even dust beautiful, he mused, a phantom warmth spreading through his chest, a sensation he hadn't known his undead heart was capable of. Lunaria, ever the cartographer, had expanded her territories. Her first maps had been of the immediate forest, meticulously charting ancient trails and forgotten streams, noting the specific recent ascent of the pines near the Whispering Gorge, or the slick gray sheen of the stones where the waterfall tumbled. But gradually, her focus shifted. She began to map their life. He'd find her sketching the intricate carvings on his mantelpiece, tracing the worn lines with a delicate finger, her brow furrowed in concentration. Or she'd render a detailed schematic of the manor's library, labeling the forgotten languages, the parchment crackle of ancient tomes. He saw their shared world, his world, through her curious, exacting eyes. One evening, he discovered a new addition to her collection, a small, unbound sheet. It was a charcoal sketch of him, caught unawares, watching her sleep. The lines were stark, capturing the sharp planes of his face, the shadowed hollows beneath his eyes, but softened by an undeniable affection. A shiver, not of cold, but of profound recognition, ran through him. "You see me, Valkyrie," she had murmured one twilight, leaning her head against his cool shoulder as they watched the first stars prick the velvet sky. Her breath, warm and fragile against his neck, was a constant, gentle reminder of her ephemeral nature. Not just the shadow, but the man within it. Quote. His silence was an affirmation. He had learned to crave the quiet rhythm of her human presence, the soft beat of her heart, the faint, sweet scent of her blood that no longer triggered the primal hunger but instead, a deep, protective tenderness. His senses, once attuned to the whisper of prey, now savored the mundane miracles of her existence. Yet, with every season that turned, a quiet dread began to unfurl within him, a tendril of ice around his ancient heart. Lunaria's laughter, though still vibrant, occasionally held a softer edge. The delicate lines at the corners of her eyes, once fleeting expressions of joy, now lingered a fraction longer. Her hands, nimble as they traced the contours of an old map, sometimes bore a faint, almost imperceptible tremor. He watched the subtle ebb and flow of her mortality, a silent, agonizing countdown that only he could perceive. One crisp autumn morning, the scent of damp leaves and wood smoke heavy in the air, he found her staring out the window at the skeletal branches of an old oak. Her back was to him, her shoulders a little more stooped than he remembered. "The leaves fall, Valkyrie," she said, her voice a low murmur, "and new ones bloom. But for us, for humans, the cycle ends." Quote. He moved to stand beside her, his unbeating heart a stone in his chest. The chill of his proximity didn't seem to bother her anymore. She leaned into him, her warmth a stark contrast to his perpetual cold. "I have seen countless seasons turn, Lunaria," he admitted, his voice rough with an emotion he could barely name. "Fear. Trees wither, mountains erode. But humans, you are so fleeting. A single, exquisite breath." Quote. She turned in his arms, her eyes, those vibrant pools of intelligent curiosity, now held a deep, knowing serenity. A faint silver thread glinted in her auburn hair. "And that breath, Valkyrie, is why we live so fiercely. Why we love so completely. Because we know it will end." Quote. She reached up, her fingers, still wonderfully agile, cupping his jaw. "Don't mourn me before I'm gone, my love. Live with me now. Let me finish my work. Let me leave you something tangible." Quote. His immortal eyes, that had witnessed empires crumble and stars shift, welled with a moisture he hadn't known he possessed. He bent his head, pressing his lips to her brow, tasting the faint, clean scent of her skin, the undeniable tang of time etched onto her. Her work became her magnum opus. The sprawling oak table was now entirely consumed by a single, vast map, larger than anything he had ever seen her attempt. It wasn't a map of a kingdom, or a continent, but of the shared sanctuary, their life. Intricate, swirling lines depicted the ancient forest, but interspersed with notes in her elegant script. "The dell where Valkyrie first spoke my name, the air thick with damp earth and unspoken fear. The library, where sunlight dusts ancient knowledge, and Valkyrie's hand first brushed mine across a forgotten tome. The threshold where I saw his true form, and knew love deeper than fear." There were tiny, detailed sketches, the precise curve of a gargoyle's wing on the manor, the specific pattern of light filtering through the stained glass window in his study, a delicate rendering of his own shadowed profile beside hers. It was a cartography of the heart, a chronicle of their unconventional existence. As the years advanced, and Lunaria's steps grew softer, her breath shallower, she worked tirelessly, fueled by a quiet urgency. Valkyrie would sit beside her, reading aloud from the old books she loved, his low voice a steady balm in the growing twilight of her days. He helped her grind pigments, held the heavy parchment flat, his ancient hands assisting her mortal purpose. One final spring, the forest outside exploding with a riot of green and nascent bloom, Lunaria laid down her quill. The great map covered the entire table, a vibrant, detailed testament to their love, their life, their chosen world. Her hands, now frail and spotted, gently smoothed the last section. A faint smile touched her lips, a serene acceptance in her eyes. "It is done, my love," she whispered, her voice a wisp of wind through dry leaves. "Everything I wanted to give you." Quote. He knelt beside her, his face buried in her hair, inhaling the faint, sweet scent of her, mingled now with the earthy perfume of old parchment and the metallic tang of ink. This is what it means to be alive, to love, he realized, to experience the exquisite pain of impermanence. He looked up, his immortal gaze sweeping over the map. It wasn't just paper and ink. It was her memory, her soul, etched onto a tangible form. It was their love, mapped out for eternity. "I will keep it safe, my heart," he vowed, his voice thick with a grief that would span centuries, yet laced with a profound, enduring peace. Always. Quote. She reached for his hand, her touch feathery and fading. And I will always be here, Valkyrie. In the forest, in your heart, in these maps. Her eyes closed, a final, soft sigh escaping her lips, carrying with it the last of her human warmth. Valkyrie remained there, cradling her. The manor fell silent once more, but it was a different silence now. Not the empty stillness of centuries of isolation, but the profound quiet of a love that had bloomed and been fully lived. He lifted her gently, carrying her to the small, sun-dappled glade she had loved, nestled deep within the oldest part of the forest, surrounded by ancient, moss-draped stones. Here, among the whispering trees, he laid her to rest, beneath the towering oak she had meticulously charted, its gnarled roots a testament to enduring life. Back in the manor, the great map remained on the oak table. Valkyrie would sit there for hours, his fingers tracing the lines Lunaria had drawn, reading the stories she had inscribed. He saw the world through her eyes, felt the brush of the wind through her hair, heard the distant clang of a bell as she heard it. The manor, the forest, even his own existence, had been transformed by her mapping. He no longer merely existed, he remembered. He no longer merely endured, he cherished. And though the ache of her absence was a constant companion, it was tempered by the vibrant, everlasting presence of her legacy. Her love was a map he carried within him, guiding him through the endless nights, a dark, enduring flame that illuminated his immortal path. The silence of the ancient woods, once a symbol of his solitude, was now filled with the echo of Lunaria's laughter, woven into the rustle of leaves, the whisper of the wind, the very heart of the forest she had so lovingly mapped.